My name's Len Arthur. I was the Secretary and General Dogs Body of a campaign called Save Care Homes and Community Centres, I think. SHAC, we were known as.
Well, I started the campaign because it affected me and my family personally. My mother is a resident in Park Newydd Care Home, and she'd been living there at the time, I think, for a few months.
You all right, Mum? Are you okay?
I had a letter through the door saying about a meeting, about, the proposed closures, but I found the meeting actually threw up more questions than answers to me.
As long as you were happy, then that's all I care about.
Len and Helen have been campaigning against the closure of 11 council-owned care homes for the past 18 months. But how did we get here? In 1990, Margaret Thatcher announced a National Health and Care Act, which essentially meant that where once local authorities were the primary providers of social care, they could now commission care from private providers, turning the sector into a competitive market.
That's kind of narrowing the market in England. Now, what we're somewhat behind that curve in Wales, but clearly that we've got a job to do.
Now, 84% of adult social care in the UK is run by private providers.
There's a real tension between central government and those local governments, or in terms of who's delivering what and accountability.
In Rhondda Cynon Taff, located outside Cardiff in South Wales, austerity cuts have affected the vulnerable in the community, and hundreds of care home residents have faced eviction. The campaign managed to save 9 of the 11 care homes, and Helen's mother was one of the residents lucky enough to keep her home.
Evidence does show that people die. When residential care homes are threatened with closure, then people start to die.
What Len is describing is referred to as transfer trauma, a phenomenon which experts have named after the trauma that older people may suffer should they be moved from one home to another.
The trauma that people go through in that situation, being evicted from what is essentially their home, is totally and utterly unacceptable.
In the council's proposals to Cabinet, their reasoning for the closures of 11 care homes was that the need for residential care was falling. This is despite a Welsh Government report estimating that all residential care home beds will be in use in Rhondda Cynon Taff up until 2035. Christine Corlett-Walker, a researcher in social care from the Centre for the Understanding of Sustainable Prosperity, or CUSP, explains the potential hidden reasoning behind the council's decision.
Austerity has had an enormous impact on the social care sector. Funding declined between 2010 and 2015 by 17%. It's now recovered somewhat, but it was still not back at pre-2010 funding levels. And when you're talking about a system that is already absolutely stretched and at capacity, a 17% decline in funding is enormous.
We worked out that the council would have, if they closed all the homes, they would have saved in the region of about £10 million a year in spending.
So, moving residents can have severe consequences. The next option to save money on council-owned care is turning to private providers, but that might not end well either. Private providers' drive to make profit can sometimes overtake the drive to deliver care.
When we look at the data, areas of higher competition in the UK between social care providers actually have a lower quality of care.
My mother had just settled into Park Newydd. She would have deteriorated really if maybe an alternative care home would have been acceptable, but then there was the worry then of having to start again.
Horrific spender, so good looking, so refined.
In Park Newydd, the carers there have been working there long term. You know, some of them have been there like 15 years, 9 years. So they get to know that person. But when my mother was living at home with a package of care, the new carer had walked in and that person never knew nothing about my mother. Yeah, maybe she can do the basics, but what's important is that they build up a rapport with that person.
This core commodity is time and care and attention from your carer. So it's a financially very tricky system to make work when you have a government who's underfunding the system and providers whose central goal is to make profit. And so kind of the people who lose out from that are the workers and the beneficiaries.
My dad, 92, was still my mum's sole carer. My mum had dementia for 12 years. In the end, my dad couldn't cope, and she went into a local nursing care home. And my dad used to visit every day, and in the end, he had to go there as well. Absolutely, in my mind, it was the care and the support they received there that kept them alive for the last 4 or 5 years of their lives, you know. And to have closed that down, you know, and thrown my parents out and to have to find somewhere else would have finished them.
A report by the Healthcare Foundation estimates that by 2030, the social care sector could need an extra £14.4 billion to meet the future demand. But are there other solutions to the social care crisis we are in?
In my view, it's absolutely clear. When people require 24-hour residential care, when that's needed, it should be part of the National Health Service. And therefore, it should be free at the point of need. If you're rich, it doesn't matter. But if you're poor and you've gradually scraped together enough to buy a house and so on, and that goes down the drain and the money ends up in these people's pockets, that's not acceptable.
In terms of immediate solutions that, you know, it would be great to see the government act on. It would be great to see them look beyond the question of securing long-term funding. They need to be thinking about how they can promote social enterprises, charities, you know, voluntary sector organisations, where profit is less in tension with the social goals and the social outcomes of the sector.
So, there is time for a solution, but the government needs to step up. In the meantime, campaigns like SHAC may be the only driving force for helping the vulnerable in our communities.
You've got to get older one day. Let's give respect to the people who deserve it and who've worked all their lives in this country, and they've contributed a lot to the country and to society.
When I kissed you and called you